As a surgeon and director of the University of Chicago Transplant Center, you have performed over 1,000 liver transplants. As a consultant to the former Chinese Ministry of Health, now renamed the National Health and Family Planning Commission, what kind of suggestions and services have you offered to the Chinese government in bettering their organ transplantation work?
Right. So I got involved with helping the then Vice Minister of Health, Wang Jifu, back in about 2006, soon after he declared publicly that China was using organs from executed prisoners. Soon after that, we submitted a grant to the China Medical Board to fund the reforms and educational programs that would be necessary to ultimately transform the Chinese transplant system. And having been awarded those grants, we proceeded with developing a plan and a vision together that would ultimately lead China to develop an internationally accepted ethical transplant system that would benefit Chinese citizens and would have Chinese cultural sensitivities so that it would be accepted by the population. So what my role was to understand both sides of the coin, as it were, both what the international standards were in terms of process and ethics, as well as the Chinese side of what was actually able to be done in China in the current system.
Mm-hmm. I understand there must be an internationally recognized system or criteria to judge how a country's organ transplantation work has been developing. If so, where do you think China was standing when you went there 2006, and where do you think China is standing now at the beginning of 2017?
That's a great question, and the first standard internationally is to have an ethical system to treat both the donors as well as the candidates and recipients. And back in 2006, neither of those criteria were being met. That is really the first kind of entry into an internationally acceptable system. The candidates and recipients were not being treated ethically because there was no quality standards or requirements for the centers that were calling themselves transplant centers, and the donors were not being treated ethically because the organs were coming from executed prisoners in which informed consent cannot be obtained. And so really the first step in an internationally acceptable standard was not even close to being met in 2006. Once we have developed that now in the last 10 years, I would say that China is still at its infancy in developing what we would consider to be a robust organ donation system. It is leaps and bounds better than it was, let's say, even 6 or 8 years ago, but it still has many ways to go. The standard, once you have an ethical system to treat both the donors, the candidates, and the recipients, then one of the metrics that is frequently used to look at how effective a donor system is the number of donors per million of population. And the numbers are improving. They are one of the highest, if not the highest, in Asia already, but there needs to be quite a bit more work to do. China is currently in the, let's say, 2.5 or 3 donors per million. The highest performing country is Spain in the 40s. The United States is in the high 30s in terms of donors per million. And ultimately, we would love to see China continue to make progress towards getting more into the mainstream of the number of donors per million that many other countries have.
Mm-hmm. Now, a campaign, I understand, is going on to mobilize people, to inform them and to educate them of the importance and the significance of becoming organ donors. As one of the latest initiatives to encourage that is an effort undertaken by the China Organ Transplant Development Foundation in partnership with Alipay to establish a more convenient online registry system for people who may become potential donors. But organs, as you said, are still in short supply, as some 300,000 people supposedly wait for organ transplants in China every year. What are your recommendations for the Chinese government to continue expanding its source of organs in a legitimate and transparent way?
Right. So one of the best ways is to have a successful organ transplant system in the country and in everyone's region, so that people start to realize, oh, the person in the village, down the road a bit, got a transplant and he or she is doing well, and those types of stories in every village and every community around China will help organ donation dramatically. The systems that register potential donors are very important in that starts the conversation between the citizens to say, I have made a decision to donate my organs if that situation allows it when I die, and those conversations are very important. It is also important to note, however, that is those numbers obviously underestimate the number of donors that can donate in any particular society, because it's only obviously those who indicate their preference by putting their name on a list have made much progress towards being an organ donor at that time. But even those people who have not declared their wishes can still donate via their family's consent at the time of death. Mm-hmm. So those registries and the conversations are very important, but are not required in order for the citizen to be a donor if the situation allows that person to be a donor, given that the family can consent for the organ donation.
Definitely more mobilization work, more information work needs to be done in this regard. Finally, citizen organ donation has become now the only legitimate source of transplantable organs in China, and China has enacted legislation to ban the use of executed prisoners as a transplant source. However, there are still rumors circulating in some Western media that China continues to harvest organs from death row prisoners. What do you think of such stories, and what are your observations in this regard?
My observations are that the transplant professionals that I interact with when I visit China, and I have been to China several dozen times over the past, let's say, even decade, the transplant professionals and other people involved in transplantation that I know of seem to indicate to me that the only transplants being performed are those that are now being performed via the state-endorsed voluntary citizen-based organ transplant system. Although there may be just a few minor people who try to break those rules, if identified, I know that the government is very committed to investigating and prosecuting to the fullest extent of the law those scenarios in which may be outside of the rules. I think that the skepticism in the Western press is, first of all, based on the fact that for many years the transplant community knew that China was utilizing organs from executed prisoners, but it was only in 2006 when Huang Jifu admitted to the world that in fact that was occurring. And so the lack of being proactive back in the late 90s and early 2000s, denying the fact that organs were being utilized from executed prisoners, I think gives the Western press some pause in terms of understanding the changes that have gone on in China over the past decade. Then the final thing is that it's very difficult to prove that something doesn't exist. It's very easy to prove that things do exist. I can prove that there is a voluntary citizen-based organ donor system in China, and that those organs are then allocated in a transparent way to patients in a rank order list through the system that I helped develop. We can prove that. We can see donors. We can see organs. I have seen transplants from those donors, organs recovered from those types of donors and transplanted into patients who are on the waiting list in China. So I have seen those transplants. I have not seen any of the transplants that are still said to occur via other types of systems. And so, like I say, it's easy to prove things exist. It's very difficult to prove that things do not exist. We know that the number of transplants performed and the patients that are being followed in China would roughly, obviously all the patients who get transplants need immunosuppression, and we're able to follow the sales of those immunosuppressive drugs through international databases. And we know that the amount of drugs that are being utilized in China roughly is equivalent to the number of transplants being performed in China. So that gives us an impression that there's not a significant amount of transplants being performed outside of the system that I helped the Chinese government develop.
Thank you very much, Dr. Millis. We have to leave it there. That was Dr. Michael Millis, Vice Chair for Global Surgery and Director of Hepatobiliary Surgery at the University of Chicago.